Hello and welcome back to The Scriptures Are Real. I'm your host for today, Lamar Newmeyer, and here's Kerry Muhlstein, which you know well, I'm sure.
Hey, it's been so long, Lamar. I've missed you. How are you?
It's been a while too. Yeah, I followed your exploits in Egypt there, and you around there, and all the different guests that you've had on in the last little while, and I've really enjoyed a lot of those talks. I wanted to be there, like, oh, that was great. I love that too. You know.
Well, I'm glad to be with you again. You have a way of bringing out the best in me. I hope I have at least some good effect on you, but you have a way of getting my best thoughts coming out. So thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate it. I guess I'm just a natural comedian, and which actually I'm a comedian and an MC. So I'll be a good setup guy. I'm really excited about. I wish we could go back and talk about all the things that you talked about again, which we're not going to do. But if you are listening to this now, I really encourage you to go back and listen to some of the guests. Kerry's wife is on there, and she talked about being in Israel, and I had those same experiences when I was in Israel, and it was so much fun to listen to that. And Phil, that was all those people that had really great things to say. If you haven't listened to those, go back and check them out. There's some really great lessons in there and some good thoughts, and so you won't be disappointed to go back and listen to them. They're really great things. I listen to them when I'm not on. I listen to them. So.
Wow.
Well, I'm excited about this. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. This is probably going to be a shorter transitional type of podcast. We're going to talk about where we've been already. Now, we just finished the first 5 books of Moses, which is often called the Pentateuch or the Torah. Mm-hmm. Do you pronounce it Pentateuch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which just means the 5 books.
The 5 books, yeah, right. Yeah. Penta, 5. So the first 5 books, which we normally attribute to Moses writing. But we can't really say writing him because he wasn't there in Genesis. We probably picture him as a compiler. He compiled these books.
It served a little bit like Mormon, right? In abridging things. So, I mean, Some of it he saw. Moses chapter 1 gives us the idea that he sees at least the creation and vision. So, he's giving us some report of his vision. But then, he's compiling from writings and I guess inspiration, revelation. We don't know what all.
He seems uniquely qualified at that time to be the guy, the main guy who's going to do this. So he gets together he curates in sense of all those things that have happened in Genesis, and you can see the abridgments that are happening there because he's obviously not there when Adam and Noah are there, but he compiles them all together, and we have the book of Genesis, and of course Exodus he's front and center on. He's there. Yeah. So I have some notes here that I wrote down a while ago about how I look at these first 5 books. So I look at Genesis.
Well, and maybe before you go there, let's just say, I think it's worth noting that while I believe Moses is the author of these things, that we're not getting the final form we get them in is not how Moses gave them to us. I think there were different groups that reworked and rewrote and so on. And,
absolutely.
Deuteronomy may have a more significant reworking than some of the others. It's hard to tell, but there's some evidence for that. So we're getting Moses takes a bunch of records and abridges them like Mormon does, but then we have some other Mormons or groups of Mormons, right? And by that I don't mean members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I mean characters like Mormon who go through and add more in and edit and so on. So there are a lot of layers of levels in here, most of which I believe are inspired, although we know there are some who probably weren't, but still, that thank goodness for the Joseph Smith translation, right? That helps us with that.
Right.
That's one of the great reasons to have the Joseph Smith translation is to overcome various editorial, I guess, shortcomings. But anyway, we're fortunate as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to have that.
I agree. And because you're oftentimes, like you said, seeing an abridgment of an abridgment, so you're getting different things. And we really look at the Bible as not like one continuous book. The Bible comes from the Greek biblos, which is library. Yeah. So this is a library of books that have been assembled, and sometimes they've been through a translation or an abridgment. And so, there's some various and authors edit a little bit and say this happened. Obviously, it talks about in the first 5 books. It talks about Moses dying. Of course, he didn't write that because he's not there. Yeah. So anyway, we have
and he didn't die. So
he didn't die. That too. Yeah, that's right. And same thing in Joshua. It says about and then Joshua died, but of course, he didn't write that part. So that's a great point. So we have some abridgments of some abridgments, and there are some errors that leak in there. And again, we've talked about this many times on this. Sometimes they're incomplete. So when you abridge an abridgment, sometimes you miss some things, and things that might be clear to original authors, original readers, may not be clear to us. So some of those things we're like, I don't know exactly what that means. We get the lesson from it, which we're grateful for. But sometimes we miss some of that context. I'm not sure exactly what that means. We don't know what they were thinking, but let's take the lesson and interpret that with the Spirit, and put that in our repertoire of things that we know.
Yeah, good.
So here's what I wrote down on the 5 books. So Genesis is the story of the great patriarchs, and introduction to the covenant, which is, we have a long period of time from Adam to the time that we get to Jacob or Israel.
Yeah.
There's a lot of 1,000 years in there we get some good stories out of that, but it's compressing a lot of time into a pretty short period of or a short writing, let's say.
Yeah, I think you can. I've heard it said this way, and it really strikes me as being accurate, that in some ways Genesis is the prologue to the rest of the Bible.
Yeah,
it's setting up how we get the house of Israel in Egypt, and the house of Israel is born as they leave Egypt. But the first 11 chapters of Genesis are the prologue to the rest of Genesis, right? This is the great big sweeping story from creation of the earth and creation of nations and so on, until you get to chapter 12, where, now we're going to talk about one guy and his family for the rest of the book.
Right. Exactly. And if we want to be straight about that, it's really the rest of the book, and really everything to do with Jews and Christianity till now is really this. It's the same story of the same family, but that family can encompass the whole earth, because by adoption you can come into that family. So even if you're not original Jewish, you can be accepted into that. You're not excluded. But it's about the covenant. That's right.
Yeah.
It's about how the covenant starts. It's really about the covenant that God is making to redeem the people, the fallen people from Adam. He's redeeming that, and they will be redeemed if they follow the covenant. That's it.
Good. Yeah.
It's that simple.
You're right. And so even you're absolutely right that even the Book of Mormon, the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, and the Doctrine and Covenants are still about this same family.
Same family. Yeah. Which is really, it's the family of God, which is, again, even if you're not born into it, you got to join the family of God.
Yep. Everyone's welcome. You just got to come.
That's exactly right. So Genesis is the story of the patriarchs and Israel, and they have a specific task. It's not because they call them the chosen people. That's not because they're better, but they are chosen to do something. They are chosen to be the bearers of the word of the covenant, to take it to other people, just like Jesus says to his apostles, now that you have the word, go spread it to all nations. So that's the covenant. And
you can see in the stories of Abraham and Jacob, and I suppose it's true of Isaac as well, and we just don't have as much of his story. You can see that these specific men were chosen because they were willing to do whatever God asked them to do, and that's what he needed. It was a group of people who do whatever it was he's going to ask them to do, because he's going to ask them to do hard things.
Right. And sometimes they do it imperfectly, but I liked what you said in one of your other ones when you were talking about being in Petra, what's now modern Petra, which would be part of the wanderings of the Israelites, and you're carrying your luggage across, it's 110 degrees out. I live in Phoenix in Arizona here, and I know this feeling. And when it's hot and you're carrying stuff, who wouldn't grumble? Everybody's going to grumble, like, come on.
Yeah.
And they're not just like going from one air conditioning spot to another air conditioning spot. They're in the desert and like putting up their tents, and they're like, come on, really? This is what we came out of Egypt for?
Yeah.
So sometimes they do it imperfectly and they grumble, but I got to say, are you better than them? Are you really better than them?
I've learned I'm not.
So everybody's going to do it. We have the same thing in the Book of Mormon. Sometimes they grumble, and we sit in our Sunday school class in our air conditioning, like, fuck those guys grumbling again. I can't believe they're murmuring.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, load your whole family up on your back and carry it through the desert and see if you are all happy and singing a happy song the whole time. So anyway, so that's Genesis. Then we got Exodus. Now at the end of Genesis, the family of Israel is riding in a good spot. Jacob, not Jacob, but Joseph set up a great place for them. They go in Egypt, and at the end of Genesis, they're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
But then a few generations goes by and they're not doing so well. Now they're in bondage, and the Lord's like, nope, it's time for you guys to get up, get out, and we're going to do some refining with you. We're gonna give you a good long lesson through the desert, and you're going to learn some good hard lessons. But we're going to the purge the unbelief out of Israel.
Yeah, and this is one of the great keys to this whole story and to applying it to ourselves. If we're going to talk about the scriptures becoming real to us and applying it to ourselves, I think that again that as individuals, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph were fantastic at flushing the world out of themselves, as it were, and following God, being in the world. And they talk about being strangers, like we don't really belong with these people around us. We don't belong in this place. But that's okay. We're not really all into that. We're into being peculiar. We're into being what God wants us to be and following God. But somewhere along the line, Israel seems to lose that. And it's actually in Joshua that we get some of the evidence that they have become idolatrous. And I'm not convinced that they ever were fully not idolatrous. Jacob was trying to get his kids to get rid of some idols, and
Right.
Rachel seems to have brought some with her and so on. So I'm not sure that they ever got rid of that idolatry that was part of what was going on in Rebecca and Rachel's family, and which is why Abraham left them behind. But certainly Egypt gets into them, right? They just partake of too many elements of that culture, and so God is going to redeem them out of the bondage to the Egyptians, but He also needs to redeem them out of bondage to the idolatrous culture that they have put themselves in.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's excellent. Yeah, that's great. So again, we're seeing the story of the Lord trying to refine the people as you go along, and that's really the story. Well, to now, I mean, we're gonna have the same thing. The world's creeping in, and how do we sort good from evil, and light from darkness, and truth from error? So, yeah, so that's good. So Exodus is that story of them going out of Egypt, out of slavery, and learning to trust the Lord, because they had it. I mean, earlier on, they had it pretty good in Egypt. Their slavery, I'm sure, wasn't great, but at least the reason why they keep going, why can't we go back to Egypt? At least it was a known. At least they well, maybe we didn't like being in bondage, but at least we had some food
and water,
and there was water, and they had some things, and water, exactly. Like we're in the desert here, and if you've ever looked at the deserts of Israel, some of those things are really bare. I mean, really bare.
Yeah, and even, I mean, the Sinai area and say the Petra area where they are initially is even worse. So
yeah, it's just sand forever.
Yeah, sand and granite.
Yeah,
good luck with that.
Yeah. So anyway, so there we have Exodus, then Leviticus. Now Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. So this is my notes. I think of Leviticus as, if you remember the handbooks of instruction that they used to have. Now they've kind of combined them a little bit different. But if you remember, maybe 5-10 years ago, the handbooks of instruction, you had the bishops and stake presidents and ones that were charged with leadership there had like a kind of a light blue handbook. And then the handbook for elders, quorum presidents, and all the rest of
Sunday school, and
it was kind of a maroon. Yeah. So Leviticus is like the light blue handbook. It's for the leadership. It's how you do the sacrifice of this and the feast day of this and all those things. Now there's other things that happen there, but a lot of Leviticus, which is why people start to glaze over. It just sounds like repetition. Like you got to do this, and then there's this. It's a book of instructions.
Yeah, it's especially. I mean, it's all for all sorts of leaders, as you said, but maybe most especially for temple presidents. Right.
Oh, here's how you
run the tabernacle and all the sacrifices that are part of the tabernacle. Right. So that's kind of the end of Exodus and Leviticus. So right before that, though, you have this incredibly important covenant renewal with all of Israel, and that becomes a major theme for a while. And when it stops being a theme, that's a problem. It becomes a real problem when it stops being a theme. But this covenant renewal is huge for Israel as they, as a nation, enter into the covenant. And then this is the handbook of instructions for covenant holders.
Perfect. Yeah, we should set that up. Yeah, this is the covenant. And then how do you do this covenant? So just like you have, the reestablishment of the church in the 1800s, the first thing that comes out of that is the Doctrine and Covenants. Well, how do we do these things? We have a whole new people here. how do we do the sacrament? Well, the sacrament's done this way. Here's the prayers.
Yeah.
So you basically have the handbook of instructions, and here's how to do it for the priest. And then Deuteronomy is going to be the handbook for the auxiliaries later, because how do you do this in your families? And how are you supposed to conduct yourself with your own sacrifices? And how do you bring the sacrifice to the tabernacle? What animals do you use, or what type of offering for this day? So, and then we have the numbers, which I think of as the conference Saturday general conference Saturday statistical report.
All right. Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't mean to be like discounting what's in there. I don't mean that at all. But I just mean that at the beginning of Numbers, you just have like a long recitation, and this happened to these people, and here's the people, and here's the amount of people, and there's this cat,
Yeah.
It's like we do it every year or twice a year in general conference, because it needs to be said. The people need to know where we're at. Here's where we're at. So I think of Numbers as the statistical report, and you go, oh, there's that many stakes. Okay, there's that many new wards. Oh, good. Baptisms are up or down or whatever. So
yeah. Then you get all those stories that are in Numbers, right?
At the end of Numbers, yeah. Now I'm a big fan of spy novels, of James Bond and all that stuff. And I know that these spies are not the James Bond spies, but it is interesting to me that the word spies is used. So Israel's like, well, we've been wandering around the desert. We're going to get close to some other people, and these people are enemies. And so let's introduce a little bit about the Canaanites here. Why are the Canaanites so bad, and why are there so many A's in their name? That seems wrong to me.
Yeah, that's the first problem with them, is there are way too many A's in there.
That's too many A's in there.
Yeah,
and
someone spelled this in an obnoxious way. We just need to get rid of that, people.
Too many A's. That's a definite sign. And tell me the difference between Canaanites and the Amorites. You explain what you think the difference between Canaanites and Amorites.
Well, Canaanite is kind of a general term. It's for a whole bunch of different groups of people. They're not homogenous. So it's kind of the overall term for everyone in all those areas that are non-Israelite or non-Abraham related, right? So we're going to have
covenant people.
Yeah, non-Canaanites are going to be the Moabites, because they are descended from Lot. The Ammonites, they're descended from Lot, and the Edomites were descended from Esau. So they're family, as it were. And you'll note that as the Israelites go in, they're not allowed to attack these guys, right? They're part of Abraham's family, different category altogether. Whereas then Canaanites are really all of the other people in that area that are idolatrous and not part of the family. So then you get specific groups in there, and you'll see frequently like a list of 7, or sometimes it's different numbers, but are given, the Canaanites in the line, such as the Jebusites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Gittites, and so on. And so it's made clear a number of times, sometimes it's Amorites. It's made clear a number of times that there are a bunch of different groups in here. They're scattered all over the place, and it's a general Canaanite. We don't know if they were all using the same language. Very few of them do we actually have any written records for, so we can't say much about their language. We can't. There's some things about their material culture, and by that I mean the things that are left behind that you can find in the ground when we do archaeology, that are common among them, and a lot of things that aren't. Right? These really are different groups. So it's a little bit like saying what they would have said when the Europeans first came to North America with Indians. Today we'd say Native Americans, but it's a little bit like saying Native Americans. Well, what do you mean by that? There are some things that are common in their culture,
right?
But Apaches and Cherokees and the Seneca, they're all pretty different from each other in pretty different significant tribes. Ways. And some are very nomadic, and some are fairly sedentary. And so it's a label that's given to this huge group that covers a huge area, right? So North America is larger than Canaan by far, but still you get the idea that it's just a term for a whole bunch of folks.
Right. And we're going to get into that a little bit more about the Canaanites in our next section. But just kind of set up, this is why we have spies. We're sending out spies, or Israel's sending out spies.
It's a definite reconnaissance mission, right?
Yeah. What are we doing here? Who's out there? What the places like? I mean, this is by and large a nomadic group. Although we talk about nomadic, but they had to have stayed in areas for periods of time because they had crops and fields like that. So even though they moved around, there was during this 40 years of time or whatever that section of time, we probably think it's 40 years, but
Which means a long time. Yeah.
it means a long time. They're out there, but they've been living in tents and let's say they're not permanent cities. Let's say that.
Yeah.
And now we're going to get into,
but they're not moving
cities.
every single day.
No.
I mean, they stay in places for years and then move to another place and stay and so on.
Right. Exactly. But they're not permanent dwellings. But now we're getting into cities that have been established for a long time, and they have walls and defenses and things like that. So how do we deal with these people? So they send out these spies. Joshua is one of these spies.
Yeah. That
goes out there. He's one. They believe there's 12.
Yep.
12 spies he sends out to, like, hey, let's find out. So that's a neat part of Numbers. It's not just the statistical report. We also have some good stories that set up what's going to happen in the what do we call it, the conquest or the cleansing or whatever you want to call the next part, which starts with Joshua, the book of Joshua.
And it also establishes what Israel needs to do to be ready to have God help them in this way, because the group that is coming out of Egypt, honestly, they just don't trust in the Lord enough. Despite all they've seen, they don't trust in the Lord enough to follow him in this conquest action. And so the Lord is going to raise up a group that has done nothing but see his delivering miracles and has learned to really rely and trust on him. And that's a group that will go against big guys and big cities and trust that God will do it. Right. So when we get this story that we'll get to later about walking around a wall or a city 7 times, which doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense, right? It seems to me that that's something that the group that first leaves Egypt is just not going to do. They're going to say, okay, this makes no sense. And we're not seeing a lot of food while we're here. But the group that has been raised in the wilderness, trusting in God, Joshua says to them, walk around the wall. Then last day, walk around it 7 times. And then they say, okay, we'll do it. Right. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't matter.
Right. I mean, again, we're testing the faith. What's the faith like? And so they've learned a good thing. So Israel isn't always about grumbling, and isn't always about, like, a lot of times they have a great faith. I mean, that takes a lot of faith. Stand in front of a wall, and I'm sure there's arrows and things that they can throw at you, and you're just going to walk around.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But they have become refined. They are a different people, a different group that has been refined by God.
Very good. So that's Numbers, and Numbers again is going to set up Joshua, and then Deuteronomy is again another. And again, I'm not trying to say this is all that's in there, but a lot of Leviticus and Deuteronomy are the handbook of instructions for the people. We're going to set this up, and this is how you do these things. So there's some clarifications on the law, and it's specifically for the non-Leviticus people. This is for everybody else. So that's what we have in Deuteronomy. So there we go. That's the 5 books of Moses that we have there. We have the Genesis sets it all up. Exodus is the begin the refining. And then we have Leviticus.
Oh, we can say it's a refinery. That's fine.
A refinery.
I'm
Okay.
good with that.
The
wilderness is a refinery.
All right, that sounds good. Leviticus and Deuteronomy are handbooks of instructions, and Numbers is our report, and also it's kind of a little complete library in its own, which is why the Torah is the main book of scripture for the Jews now, our current Jews. They use the Torah as their scriptural basis, and then they have the book of the law later that is they're rabbis and everything that have refined those laws.
And there are 2 important recurring themes, at least in our podcast, that I think are also recurrent themes in these first 5 books as we summarize this. We've talked a number of times about kind of the communing while we're on our commute, right?
Right.
And that becomes huge for the house of Israel. They are on a commute.
Yes.
And symbolically, it's to come into the promised land. Literally, it's to come into the promised land, and symbolically, that's about coming into the true promised land. And they need to commune while they do that. They cannot make it in if they're not getting direction from God. God has to tell them when to go, where to go, what they should do. The tabernacle becomes key in this, and that should teach us something as well, that this is the key place for communion. But listening to God and not ignoring him becomes the key element of their commute, is how well they are doing at their commuting.
Right. And they're dependent for everything. I mean, the food, if they didn't have manna, they wouldn't be able to eat the quail that show up.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're dependent on God for everything. So they're really learning to rely on everything and get the grumbling out of the way.
And
Let's
oh
really
yeah.
pay attention.
And I think there's a real lesson for us in here. We are in a very difficult refinery period of our commute. This refinery might become a nice, I don't know. We'll see where we go with that. But anyway, there is really, we're in a period that is difficult and a crucial segment of our commute as a people and as individuals to be with God again. And if we're not getting better at communing during our commute, we're in trouble. President Nelson has told us that a number of times.
Yes.
And it has to happen in a couple of ways. One, our personal communion through the Holy Ghost, and two, the communion gives us as a church through the prophet and how well we do at listening to that. And we're getting plenty of information lately. President Nelson and President Oaks are as good at giving us the information we need for right now and what we need to do for right now. Well, President Irene, I didn't mean to leave him out. Sorry, but as any first presidency ever, we are receiving so much incredible information about what we need to be doing right now. The question is, how good are we at that communion part and listening and doing?
Yeah, I agree. And we are seeing a lot. And look at the state of our political affairs. And again, this podcast is not about being political, except to the fact that we talk about the good principles which should govern our lives, both politically, spiritually, in our homes. We support good principle, and we let that good principle govern these things. So look for the good principle that is in these things and use that as your Urim and Thummim to determine the truth from error. I mean, it's really getting quite mixed out there. It's hard to determine what's what, who's got the good information, who's got misinformation or disinformation, all these words that are out there. How do we determine truth from error? And it is really relying on God. Look at what he set up, and the pattern that he has set up is he gives you leaders to get that. But we're not left alone. You've got the books, you've got the leaders, you've got the Spirit. Seek those things to determine what's going on. Don't leave it to your own understanding. We're going to find that in Proverbs. Lean not to thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him. He shall direct thy paths. So if we're thinking, well, I know what's better. This is what's good, and we're nice, and we're good people, and we're going to do it this way. Okay, but you're going to do that at your peril. Look at what the writings and the prophets are saying right now and align yourselves with those things.
I agree. And like you, by the way, that's the youth theme this year. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lean not unto thy own understanding. But if one of the consistent messages in Scripture, especially the Old Testament and the Book of Mormon, it's really consistent in the Book of Mormon, is that if you are not governed by righteous principles and following righteous leaders, you're going to have problems. And I fear that we're in a world where we let our politics or our thought leaders influence the way we filter the information we get from our prophets more than the way it should be, which is that we allow or we make sure that what we're getting from our prophets causes that we filter what we get from our political and thought leaders through what we're learning from the prophets.
Right.
And right now, I think it's often happening the opposite way. And the scriptures are pretty replete in telling us that doesn't work out well.
I agree. And that part of that, the lean not to that understanding, I think a lot of times we think we're smarter than we really are. And we see this in the Book of Mormon and in the Bible. The people think, we got this. No, we got this. I heard you before, but right now I'm figuring this out.
Yeah.
And when
I saw what Assyria's doing, and that's cool. So that we're going to do it that way.
Oh yeah, they've got it locked down. Egypt, man, they had to, whatever. They've got it down. The world's figured this out. I mean, you old-fashioned religious people don't know what you're talking about. Who wants to listen to old dead prophets? We got some, we can split the atom. We have iPods, okay. Whenever you think that you're that good, you're in trouble. So let's get back to the covenant path, and lean not to thine own understanding. So,
and that's that second theme then that is, besides the commute and commune, the second theme is covenant. And Deuteronomy really is more than anything else. It's a renewal of covenant where Moses has all those people who were too young or weren't born yet at Sinai renew the covenant, and he teaches about the covenant from beginning to end in that book. When they go into the promised land, he wants them to go in understanding and keeping the covenant.
Right. So we're back to the covenant, renew that. Again, it's refining, a constant refining. And we're really no different today. We just need to keep renewing. Even in our lives, we go through series, where I'm at this point in my life. I should have put that on hold. Yeah. So we go through periods of lives. You're younger, you go on a mission, but now you're in mission. Now you're married, and that's a different set of things. And then now you have kids, and that's a different set of things. And now the kids are empty nester. That's a different set of things. So it's a constant refining as we commute through our life. Same thing. We just need to keep renewing. And what do we need to do for this phase of our life now? And what makes me on the covenant path? And we're going to get to that in Joshua too. In fact, why don't we end up here? We'll end this part as our little summary of the first 5 books, and then we're going to get into Joshua and talk about the next phase of Israel, because Israel is going to go a new phase. The theme remains the same. The theme will remain the same, but the names and faces are going to change, and we're going to go to a new area, a new phase of life for Israel, let's say. But the theme's going to remain the same. So that's a great look back and a great summary of where we've been on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of we call it the 5 books of Moses, but of the Bible, first 5 books. And then let's get into Joshua next, and then set up the next phase of Israel's life. How about that?
Sounds great. Yeah.
All right, good.
We have a lot to look forward to.
All right. Well, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again for joining us on The Scriptures Are Real, and we've enjoyed having you with us. Please like and subscribe, and all the different buttons that you can push. If they're in the favorable, let's push all those so we can get this message out. And hopefully this is something that is encouraging to you, that helps you on your covenant path, that helps you to feel closer to God and make the Scriptures real to you today, not just 2,000, 5,000 years ago. Make it real for you today. Thanks again for joining us.